Look at this. One button. It's one button. Like, what other build's gonna let you do that? What's up, Diablo 4 players? So let's go over one of the best leveling builds for the Sorceress in Season 4. Even though you do get the Incinerate one, you gotta hold still, you gotta channel it. It's absolutely terrible when you compare it to some of the other things that exist in the game. Now, while I want to say this is a great leveling build, you can transition this into the mid/late game, but more than likely you do want to play Frozen Orb in the late game, as it's just going to be objectively much more powerful in terms of its numerical stats. But it is a great leveling build, and a lot of you guys had asked what my build was while I was leveling, and this is what I use, and I think it is just miles ahead of a lot of different builds. So, for starters, I want to go ahead and answer the question, how am I getting all these fireball, these chain reaction explosions? Because there's a lot of newer players that maybe just hopped into Diablo for the very first time, as it went free on Xbox Game Pass. So, for starters, you do have to complete the campaign, and you also want to just go straight into Helltide. That is pretty much the primary way that majority of players will be leveling in Season 4. So, for starters, to answer the question of what is actually causing these domino chain effect explosions, it is actually the fireball enchantment. So at some point while you are playing the game, you want to go ahead and get your specialization for your class. For the Sorceress, you basically get to select 2 of these enchantments, and it will give you some sort of like big power boost for your build. And how Fireball works with the enchantment is it makes it so when you kill an enemy, this is not a lucky hit, it always works. When they die, they will explode in a fireball. This also works if you're in a party and someone else kills them. You don't even need to do 1 damage. As long as you are on their screen, they will also explode for a fireball. And if fireball does enough damage, that will then proc and kill another enemy that will cause this chain reaction. So that's pretty much what a lot of people wanted to know, as I know this is a newer game for some people here. That's the main thing that you want to do. And again, the Helltide is excellent for this. But I want to be straight up with you guys, it's not going to one-shot every single boss until you get the build really, really strong. However, in the late stages of the game, Frozen Orb is going to be objectively much stronger, but for leveling, you can't just play Fractured Winterglass, Frozen Orb in the very beginning. You're going to have to run a beginner build, and then you could transition into the late game with this build, but I would highly recommend you guys to actually swap towards the late stages of this game, as it's still great in open world content, but in terms of doing like the high end game, bosses, there's very few builds that can actually do that, and there are better recommendations, and I will link that one down below, which is going to be the Frozen Orb Sorceress. For majority of players, that's going to be the top tier build. There's also Frosty Strides, that's another really good build, but that one is not beginner friendly at all. So for starters, again, the Fireball enchantment is what actually causes this. There's actually going to be kind of 2 builds in this video. One of them is going to be a beginner one, and one is going to be sort of like the beginner / more advanced. And the reason why is because in the earlier stages of the game, I don't know what's going to be dropping for you. There is a few different things that you can get to really make this build come up online even faster and become much stronger, and that is going to be one of the uniques that you can get called the Gloves of the Illuminator, as well as getting the Tall Rasha's Iridescent Loop. Now in Season 4, they have increased the drop rates of uniques. I actually found like 8 of the Tall Rasha's Iridescent Loop while just playing the game. It's so easy to get now, and same thing with Gloves Illuminator. A lot of these uniques can just drop. In fact, even in the seasonal quest line, this can actually be a item that you acquire much earlier on, since you're just doing Helltides, and Helltides actually have a lot of different like drops, and it's quite easy to get, especially in the lower tiers of the game. You are going to be just farming Helltides, which is going to grant you the ability to get that Tempering Steel. You take the Tempering Steel, you fight Gregor. Gregor has a chance to drop this very easy. Like I'd say maybe 1 out of 4 or 5 chances. It's very common. So just go to do Gregor, you'll get Gloves Illuminator. This is going to make Fireball actually shoot out and bounce. That's how we get the bounce effect in the gameplay. But if you do not have this, it's totally fine. In fact, in the earlier stages, you can't just spam on Fireball. What you're going to be doing is using a skill called Arclash, because it's a basic skill, it is free to use, and it's one of the best ones because it's going to grant you movement speed. So many leveling builds will use this. Now, if you kill one enemy with Arclash, what's going to happen is a Fireball is going to come out, and you'll still get that chain reaction. I'm going to show you guys some quick little gameplay here. This was actually from Season 2. It's one of the best leveling builds in the game, and I'm not casting Fireball, but you'll see in the gameplay here that I am just going to shoot out fireballs after a target dies. You just saw that target die, and you can see all of these like chain reaction explosions. Those are all from the Fireball enchantment. So again, you still want to scale Fireball, and you can get bonuses for Fireball, but essentially you're not even casting Fireball manually. It does it automatically when you kill an enemy. That's the most important thing here. So you can actually play with other skills if you want to, but a lot of times in the earlier stages, your mana won't be as good. However, in Season 4, there are a few changes, and let's go over them. So these are kind of the aspects that you want to look out for. Don't feel like you have to copy this exactly, because this is a leveling build. I don't expect everyone to get all of these things earlier on. So for starters, in the earlier stages, you can look for Juggernauts, Disobedience. Those are all great. Hectic aspect can be great as well, to reduce your cooldowns of your other skills, other things like Teleport, just really help out. And then Concussive Strikes is okay, gives you basically more damage, because you have a chance to actually daze the enemies, so it's survivability and it's damage. And then I like the aspect of Slaughter, just lets you move from pack to pack a little bit faster if you don't take damage. And then Moonrise is actually the most key aspect here for your damage. In the earlier stages, you're going to be using Arclash, which is a basic skill, so it's going to ramp up and give you a massive amount of damage as well as attack speed, because you can't just spam Fireball. And then you can also look at getting the rapid aspect that's going to make it so your basic skills give even more attack speed. Attack speed is key in the very earlier stages of the game. And then if you get like Prodigy's aspect or Incendiary, these are all also great to go ahead and be able to spam your Fireball a lot earlier on, because again, in the earlier stages of the game, mana is definitely a thing. But there is a new stat that you can get called mana per second. You can get this in 3 different departments. That is going to be in your helmet, your chest piece, as well as your boots. You can get mana per second. That's the most important stat in the earlier stages of the game. Also, getting some resource cost reduction can be great in the earlier stages of the game. If you can get that on your weapons, that's great. In a 2-hander, you can get an insane amount of resource cost reduction. Later down the line, though, you can look at, let's say, Elementalist aspect to basically give you 100% crit. Now, I would say this is something that you want to try to get eventually. Don't feel like you have to get this one earlier on in terms of the aspect, but if you want to kind of scale this from like the earlier stages to like the mid/late game, this is an excellent way to get a 100% crit in the build. If you put this on the amulet, this alone at a higher roll will give you 60% crit strike chance. You have a base crit chance of 5% in the game, and with natural dexterity, you can get anywhere from 5 to 10%. So, with basically just this and your natural crit strike chance, basically, because I'm counting like the dex that you're going to get just as you just start equipping gear, or in the Paragon board, you get easily like 70% chance to crit. And then later down the line on the Paragon board, you can get a bonus to 12% for your Pyromancy skills. It's very easy to reach 100% crit. You can get crit in your amulet, your gloves, as well as your rings. But don't worry too much about crit in the earlier stages of the game, and don't worry about getting all of these aspects. So what you really want to focus in on, again, is just spamming Moonrise. Well, this is the thing that you want. You want to spam your basic attack so it ramps up your Moonrise stacks, so you're going to be able to gain a massive amount of basic skill damage and movement speed. It just lets you progress through the game much faster here. And then on top of that, the gems don't really matter earlier on, but if you happen to have them, those are kind of like ideal ones that you can go for. And on top of that, the skill tree. So this is for like basically leveling. You have to put a point into Fire Bolt because it's going to start burning enemies. That is a source of our mana here for regen. And then you're looking at getting Arclash. So you do want to put points into your basic skill over here. You have to put a point in here for the enchantment here. And then Fireball. You can get the one that gets crit later. In the earlier stages, Greater Fireball is totally fine because it deals percent of the burning damage we've applied as additional direct damage. And in the earlier stages of the game, you might only have like 10% crit, so it doesn't really matter too much, though. Just you can get them. Then we're just going here, getting some more damage, and then you can get extra survivability. Teleport is great. Ice Armor is great. There's actually a newer change to Shimmering, so you get more basically cooldown on it. Then we're just getting some stuff to go ahead and get some damage reduction. Hydra is great for leveling as well. I really like that skill. It's great. And then we are getting this Pyromancy skills that deal some more damage. We can also immobilize the enemies. There is the aspect of Umbral that you can consider as well, that will also help out not only with survivability with this, but also giving you extra resources so I can continuously spam on stuff. And then over here, we're not, by the way, scaling any burning damage, really. We're just trying to get the burn to apply, so we get these bonuses, like there's a bonus to crit, which you'll get eventually into like the late game. And like I said, there's kind of 2 builds in this video. So Devouring Blaze is great in the later stages of the game when you start scaling crit. So we're going to get extra mana regen here, extra mana cost reduction. And if you want to get an ultimate, you can get Inferno later down the line. But in the earlier stages, it doesn't really help out nearly as much because most of the time you're just going to Arclash your way to victory. But you can put in a point or 2 into Inferno. And then with Supreme Inferno, this can definitely help out against the bosses to give you infinite resources for the duration. as you may not have enough resources in the earlier stages of the game. But going over the skills in the early game that I really liked Hydra. There's a newer buff with Hydra, and you can actually have 2 Hydras out at once. You don't need the aspect. If you do get the aspect, you can have 3. If you get it, that's fine. It's actually a pretty good aspect to get in the very beginning of the game. So this is what I like to level up with. So again, I'm not really casting Fireball in the earlier stages of the game, just running it for the enchantment. But if I have some mana, I'll use it. So Arclash, just keep on spamming that, and then these are for your defensive stats, and then your mobility, and then just throw up Hydras when you see an elite pack. Now, later in the game, you don't really need a Hydra at all. Later in the game, if you do get Talrosh's Iridescent Loop, the Ice Blades will kind of act as our other source of applying the extra element for Iridescent Loop, because you need to get different elements to get your bonus on damage. And then in the gameplay here, you're seeing I'm playing with Inferno. Inferno is great for grouping up an elite as well as a bunch of small monsters. When one small monster dies, it's going to start popping and killing all the other small monsters, and if they are all sucked into a giant ball, what's going to happen is that elite is going to instantly melt, and it's very, very satisfying. But you could drop Inferno completely if you want to. And if you do want to swap into Frost Nova, that's another great option. But still running the same enchantments. And as far as the skills go, now I'm just spamming Fireball. You'll see pretty much, with the exception of if there's a boss, because this is not necessarily like a one-shot boss build, and it's never really going to be designed to do it. But it's mainly focused in on, okay, we're just going to kill all the small monsters instantly, so that if we are in a party, the Necromancer or whatever the case may be can actually deal with the boss much faster. It is by far, like, I mean, I'm just shooting like 1 here and it just pops everything. So it cleans up all of the trash instantly. Again, on bosses, don't expect to one-shot them earlier on. The only builds I would say that can really one-shot earlier on, again, talking about a leveling build here, is pretty much the Necromancer with the Golem. That's like the one that will do an incredible amount of damage. So it's really great for them to actually take out the bosses. And if you do want to run Incinerate as a hybrid, because you do get a bunch of the aspects for free, feel free to go ahead and throw in Incinerate for the bosses, but I was never a fan of Incinerate. In fact, a lot of you guys came by the stream and were like, dude, Incinerate sucks, I like your build, do you have the build guide? And technically, I already had this build up for Season 2, and, well, let's go ahead and give it an update here, because it's just by miles way faster, especially since Helltide is the main way of leveling. So later on, you can transition to Juggernauts as well as Disobedience. Now, I do have both of them here. You may not need both of them, but in the leveling progress here, you need to make sure that you reach your armor cap, which is 9,230. In the earlier stages of the game, when you just reach like the next world tier, like specifically once you get to world tier 4, if you are not armor cap, you will melt instantly. So if you need to run Disobedience and Juggernaut, that's fine. If you already reached 9,230, just run Juggernauts. Or if you already have a bunch of armor rolls, then you don't need to run both. It's just there as kind of a suggestion. But mana per second is really great. I'm not going to go over in depth, as this is more of a leveling build, so don't feel like you have to get everything. So, again, Disobedience and Juggernaut's very important to keep yourself up. Again, mana per second, life, int, pretty much the normal stuff. Now, if you do get Gloves of the Illuminator, these are really great to have, as this will significantly increase your lethality against bosses. It's going to let the Fireball bounce twice, and it has this lucky hit chance to restore some sort of primary resource, which is great. And then Concussive Strikes is excellent, and eventually you do want to temper this on for specifically Fireball, where you have a chance for Fireball projectiles to cast twice. This is brand new to Season 4. If you need to get the tempering recipe, well, it's just RNG when it drops. Just keep on playing the Helltide. You'll get all the recipes eventually. But one little bonus tip: pop your recipes immediately. If you get duplicates, which can happen if you don't consume one, because the game doesn't register that your account has it, it will still drop. So as soon as you get a tempering recipe, right click on it, consume it, and then that way it won't drop again. And then over here in the leveling process, what you can get, and you may not get it earlier on, so I didn't really mention it, but if you do get lucky hit chance to deal some sort of damage, that can be actually quite great to actually get in the earlier stages, as it does a huge amount of damage, but kind of falls off towards the end of the game unless you do a lot of scaling with it. But ideally, you want to temper in on Fireball projectiles cast twice. So basically, that's a chance for double damage. That is massive. And then you could just get a natural finesse on your offensive stat. This will just add flat damage. You can get damage to distance, or you can get flat damage. If you try to shoot for the Pyro one, there's just so many other bad ones that you can hit. So my recommendation, just get the natural finesse offensive damage here. And then Elementalist Aspect becomes much better later down the line, and you want to throw this on your Amulet for the 50% bonus. And then Incendiary Aspect is just really good. It's just a chance to restore mana. You'll see that as a very common theme, as I never want to be out of mana, because when you're out of mana, you do no damage, unless of course you're going back to Arclash with Moonrise, and you can kind of play hybrid too. It's kind of at whatever point you feel like you are getting enough mana to basically spam your abilities. So again, helmet, chest, and boots are going to give you the mana. And then later you can consider running the 3 curses. This makes it so you're going to be able to increase the crit strike damage of Meteor and Fireball, and this is more towards the end of the game once you're at like very high crit. Now as far as the skill tree here, it's a little bit different. You'll see that we are going to be scaling some extra crit. Most of the nodes are actually pretty much the same, but we do want to pick up Ice Blades over here, and then we are going to be getting the crit one later down the line. And then if we want to run Inferno, that is optional here. And then for the key passive, they're both the same here. Essu's Ferocity just makes it so it gives you additional crit, and it's going to give you increased crit strike damage, which is great. And as far as the Paragon board, I'll leave it for you guys here. I'm going to go over it like really briefly. This is more so for like a build that's going to transition into something, but hey, luck is luck, and sometimes you never get that Fractured Winterglass. I've played, and I've done probably like 20 runs, never got it to drop yet, and that's fine. That's part of Diablo. So for starters, we're going to be running Unleash, that's for more mana regen, Enchantment Master with Elementalist, then Elemental Summoner with Flame Feeder, and then we're going to be going up to get Frigid Fate and Enchanter. It's important to do it in this order. You'll see the order in the top left corner here, and then we go into Ceaseless Conduit with Destruction, and then we go ahead and get Searing Heat over here for additional 12% crit strike chance, and we get to deal increased direct damage equal to 10% of your damage with fire bonus. If you get what's called non-physical damage in this game, it gives you all damage, including shadow damage. Not that it matters too much for our build, because we don't do shadow damage, because there's no Malignant Hearts anymore in the game, but this would be another source of getting like a huge amount of extra damage, which is great for non-physical. So you'll see in this build, there's a lot of what's called like non-physical damage that incorporates everything, which is really important because this is a kind of frequently asked question. How do you get this thing to get the maximum value? You never roll bonus damage with cold. You get what's called non-physical. Non-physical counts as everything, and that's how you get the max value, even though we're not even playing cold. It's one of the best nodes in the entire game over here. But yeah, there's going to be a build guide that, again, you want to transition out of, and I will leave the Frozen Orb build down below. But if you want to play this towards the end game, I mean, I've technically killed all of the Uber bosses in the previous seasons with this build. It's definitely doable, and you can absolutely melt stuff if you min-max. But don't expect, again, to one-shot all the bosses and everything. This is mainly made to clear up all the trash, and you will kill the elites within like 1 to 3 shots. But if you're doing like specifically like the Blood Maiden, don't expect to one-shot the Blood Maiden. Again, there's very few builds that will do that in the earlier stages as a leveling build, but I'm trying to keep expectations realistic. As when I was playing in a group, there were times where like it would just kill the Blood Maiden like almost instantly, and that is the Necromancer. That is not my damage. My damage though is killing all the trash, all the elites instantly, but that's part of the way that this build works. But anyways, have some fun with it. It's a great leveling build, and it is miles ahead of the Incinerate, because Incinerate, it's slow, you sit there, and I honestly find it to be one of the worst builds in the entire game, especially for like a season start, because you don't want to be holding still, you don't want to wait to ramp up your damage. This one, you throw the fireball, you walk out, and everything just kind of pops. Like you can see this, even this elite pack over here, it's melting quite fast, and you can see just within like maybe two seconds here, depending on how much attack speed that you're going to be getting. But try to get as much attack speed as possible, and the build will feel very, very smooth, especially if you are in the leveling process. I'm also going to leave the link down below for Arclash in case you guys want to see more of that and want more in-depth for like the earlier stages of the game, because that's what I did play while leveling. And then I tried the Incinerate, hated it, and then went to Fireball and loved it because it was great in the previous seasons, and they have not nerfed it. In fact, with the new tempering system, it actually received quite a nice buff. But again, check out the links down below. I will have both of the earlier leveling builds as well as like the mid to late game one down below, and have some fun with it. It's a great build. Anyways, that's gonna wrap things up. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here, subscribe, turn the bell if you want to see more Diablo and more content from other games. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.